Hello, everybody. Wow, what do you do after a film like that? You talk to the filmmaker, I guess, is one really, really good option. Beth, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
On not only a fantastic film, but on the Jonathan Daniels Award this evening. Really something. And we're honored to have you here. And I promise you, I'm not like making a date right now. I'm just using this as a timer. But excuse me. I've got to find an emoji for this. Let's go. So, you know, this is my second time seeing this film because I watched it in preparation. You've probably seen it many times. So what do you notice now when you see it? Different things come up for you?
They do. They definitely do. And it's wonderful. I want to also introduce Kevin Belli is here with me tonight. And we shot so much of this film together in Afghanistan and edited together. So, Kevin, it's great to have you here. I think I'm always I'm struck again tonight by the resilience of the girls, and it's always interesting to see the updates at the end because I have so many more updates for you now.
Please tell me
yes.
Nazima had a great baby.
So Nazima is now in Sweden. She and her husband fled Afghanistan in the summer of 2015 when she was pregnant, and they had a really treacherous journey on a boat. And they ended up in Sweden. She actually called me one night I didn't even know she had left Afghanistan. She was in Austria, and she called me kind of frantic and said, we need to get out of here. We need to get out in the next, couple hours. I don't know where to go. Should we go to Sweden? Should we go to Germany? And so now she's in Sweden. They're still living in a refugee camp. And, 6 months ago, it was better than it is today. There's more anti-refugee and anti-immigrant sentiment in Sweden and all over Europe and throughout the United States. And so they're definitely feeling that pressure right now. I'm happy to say I was back in Afghanistan in December for Rahela's graduation.
Fantastic.
So that was great. And she's now attending the college that's right next door. It's a midwife school, and so she's studying to become a midwife. And the school, it actually just recently opened, and it's exciting. There are 22 students right now, and it's one of the most important professions I think that Razia can bring to the community because the infant and maternal mortality rates are among the highest in the world in Afghanistan. So the role of a midwife is really important.
Well, you mentioned Kevin Belli, who was your DP. Were other members of your crew male? I just wondered if that made any difference when you were shooting, for instance, The Elders.
No, in fact, we ran into an issue because of Kevin's maleness at one point, unfortunately, because when the school, when the third floor was being built, there was a lot of tension, as you saw, between the village and the school, and that caused tension between the village and us, and they said, Razia really felt it would not be appropriate anymore to have an American man filming inside the school.
Well, of course, the role of American foreign policy and American aid probably, do they get American aid for the school?
They do not. All of the funding is really private. A lot of it, most of it, I would say, comes from people like you and me, just American citizens. Razia's foundation is based in Wellesley, Massachusetts, Razia's Ray of Hope Foundation. And she does a lot of fundraisers. I would say the most kind of popular fundraising program that she has right now is to sponsor a girl. It's $300 a year to sponsor one girl for the whole year, and that's kind of soup to nuts. It's the school uniform, it includes the teacher salaries, it includes what it costs to run a bus. They now run a bus because as the girls got older, it became more dangerous to have them walking to and from school. And that was becoming a barrier. More families were likely to keep their girls home. And so with the bus now running several trips to and from the school, it helps them to be able to stay in the school. It also, there's that van that the teachers take from the city, because most of the teachers still do live in the city. There are now 5 teachers who live in the village, but the majority are still coming from Kabul.
So for you, you followed a number of people in this film,
Yeah.
obviously, a couple of the teachers in Razia and even Zia, but primarily the two girls. I'm wondering if you were following others as a documentary filmmaker before choosing these two, and why these two?
Yeah, I mean, I think we zeroed in on them fairly soon, but we did follow other girls, one of whom is not featured at all in the film. She has actually one little cameo. She's the one who is doing, newspaper, and I'm so used to seeing that clip with newspaper, and then the next word is pocket. So like, newspaper, pocket just go together for me now. And she is a lovely girl from a really incredible family. Her name's Nadia. She was always first in her class, and she was very outgoing, and she really, she's a bright and rising star in the community and in the country. And we spent a lot of time with her, both in the school and at home. And unfortunately, there was a situation with another crew that came into the village, a TV crew that came in because Razia was nominated in 2012 as a top 10 CNN hero, and so there was some filming that was done, and that actually caused a lot of problems for Nadia's family, and because of that, they actually had to move out of the village for about 8 months, and both she and her family actually would have liked if we had continued to film with them, but it just really seemed like the wrong thing to do. We didn't want to cause any additional problems for the family. There was another girl that we filmed with, Yalda, and she's the one who she's introducing herself and says her father is a farmer and her mother's job is wife home, and she's a housewife, and she's lovely. And but again, her story, elements of her story were very similar to both Rahela's and Pashtana's, and it was sort of a matter of deciding which one to tell.
Yeah, and their ages, I think, Nadia was younger. Was she younger than these other ones?
She was she just graduated, so she was in the second graduating class. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about that particular age. She said, I think it was Raila said, when you grow tall, then you begin to wear a burqa. And they were at this age that was more marriageable, and I wondered if there was more sort of material for you there.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely interesting watching them grow up, and I've since put together kind of a short news kind of package of Yalda, and you see her as this young fifth grader, talking about her hopes and dreams, and it follows her, in 3 minutes it follows her right through graduation. So that was, it was kind of exciting to see it in this very short form. And she has a beautiful thing that she says that I love, and it's not in the film, but she says, life is like a guitar. It plays happy notes and it plays sad notes, and you have to listen to both.
Well, the other question is about whether or not, you got into any kind of cultural mishaps. You mentioned the crew from CNN, and you had worked before in Afghanistan for a previous film, Beyond Belief. Was that your introduction to working in Afghanistan?
I had been there once before. I traveled first there. It was late 2001, early 2002, really right after the fall of the Taliban. And
So
I would say
a very different time culturally.
Yeah, it was. I mean, what was interesting then was that, there were a lot of reports at the time about, women, throwing off their burqas, and the Taliban was gone, and now, women were free. And I didn't see anything like that at that time. Every woman that we saw was still, covered. And then, 5 years later, that was really still, very much the case in the city now. Before we had been in the north, and so I thought maybe it's just because we're not in the city, we're not in the capital. And there's a sense of security as the security in the country declines, and it's much worse now even than when we started filming. That more women often are actually choosing to wear the burqa because they feel more safe in public, and so it's family pressure, but also sometimes it's a choice that women are making for themselves. And I would say that our biggest cultural mishap came on the streets in Day Subs, in this village, when some male shopkeepers thought that we were filming a woman walking down the street in a burqa. And it really wasn't until he flipped out, and we knew it was serious at the time, but we didn't realize really how serious until we got the material translated. Yeah, he was ready to take us away with him. He was,
Wow.
yeah.
But how about security? I mean, the school is so vulnerable. There you are filming the school. How did you deal with that?
We really just tried to keep a very low profile. Life in Afghanistan very much happens behind gates. So I'm able to, get in a vehicle behind a gate, drive. I would say the driving to and from the school and time on the road is really the most dangerous time. It's when we're the most exposed. Traffic in the city is terrible. And so even though, so for example, it was in August of 2015 that I feel like there was a real change there. There were 3 bombings really in quick succession, and the Taliban was striking, an army base, a school, and they were trying to just show they could be very destabilizing and hit almost anywhere. They bombed a neighborhood, and that happened on a Tuesday, and I arrived on Thursday morning very early, and the streets were empty. It was like a ghost town. And so, the trip from the city to the school, which normally takes, an hour and a half, almost 2 hours sometimes, took about 20 minutes. Wow. Yeah.
Oh. So did you wear a hijab or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm everything I wear there, I've purchased there, and my head is always covered, hair, back, really no makeup, very, long clothing. And when I'm in the car, I try to keep the scarf out so you can't see my profile at all. Sunglasses. I usually have a burqa with me, but I have not yet worn one there.
I was curious if you were ever threatened in any kind of way for making this film, verbally or otherwise.
Yeah, so once, you do get looks, as much as I haven't always done the best job keeping a low profile, as much as I like to think I have. And there was one time when I was really quite exposing myself. I was filming in the car and filming, streets life in Kabul, and this really caused a lot of problems. And the driver was, being yelled at, and we had vans coming up inviting us to lunch with the Taliban in the next town over, and it wasn't a very smart thing to do, and I wouldn't do it again.
So you were a journalist. You were a print and radio and television journalist before you started making documentary films, if I have that right.
Yes.
So what was the switch for you about? What were you not able to cover or do, or what did you want to do that wasn't getting done in journalism?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when Kevin also, we both come from a news background, and it was really this desire to do longer and longer format pieces, more in-depth pieces, and being able to select those stories and really be able, for me personally, I really wanted to focus on international topics, but topics that could also, connect me as an American and an American audience in hopefully a special way with the world.
You've also developed an advocacy, or an impact campaign rather, for this film. Have you for other films as well?
We have, yes. So
maybe we should talk just a little bit about the other films that you've done.
Sure.
As features, directed as features. Beyond Belief, 2006, 7? I'm not sure.
Yep.
You should talk about it, not
Sure.
me. Tell them about this film.
Sure. And actually, Beyond Belief it's an interesting, this film is very much an outgrowth of that film. And Beyond Belief is the story of 2 women who were widowed on September 11th, both from the Boston area. They were both pregnant on 9/11, and their husbands were each in one of the 2 planes that left Logan Airport and were flown into the World Trade Center towers. And they connected after that tragedy and decided they were trying to understand what on earth was happening in Afghanistan, that terrorists were training there to then, go on to kill their husbands. And they started to learn about life in Afghanistan and just couldn't believe what life was like for everybody, and then, more specifically for women, and then very specifically for widows like they now were. And they decided that they wanted to, and then, America goes to war in Afghanistan, and they thought, my God, now there are going to be even more widows. What can we do to help? And so they really wanted to, reach across that divide and connect. At first, they just wanted to connect, to one Afghan woman. And then they realized, quite frankly, the power of the dollar in Afghanistan, and that they really could do, so much more. And so they started to contributing to programs that could help widows in Afghanistan become self-sufficient, because most widows are not allowed to work outside the home. So it's, what do you do, and how do you support yourself and your children? And so that was their mission. And one of the things that they did to raise awareness and to raise funding was to ride their bikes from Ground Zero back to Boston. And they had the really beautiful idea, I think, of bringing the spirits of their husbands home, and also bringing attention to this very personal cause. And when they got back to Boston Commons, there was this, huge party for them, and tents set up, and bands, and food, and people, celebrating them and what they were doing. And one of the people who was there that day was Razia Jan. And that was the day that Kevin and I met her. And it was well before she started, she wasn't thinking about doing the school yet. She had just really started going back to Afghanistan and was involved in other things. She was volunteering at some orphanages. She had organized with the US military this thing called Operation Shoe Fly, and she organized 30,000 pairs of shoes to be donated and delivered. And so things like that she was doing. And then, we stayed in touch, and Patty, one of the two widows, became the executive director of Razia's Ray of Hope Foundation. So there was this quite integrated, connection. And so of course we were in touch, and when we learned that Razia was starting a school in a village that never had a girls' school, it was just, very, very inspiring, and we knew we wanted to tell that story.
And what a transformative decade it's been since then. In 2007, when you made that film, you also made a film based in Iraq. And I'm wondering what the connection is here for you, or what the draw is in these films making films in places where there have been, conflicts, America heavily, heavily involved. What's the draw for you?
And I think that is the connection, that America is so heavily involved in Afghanistan and in Iraq. The Iraq film, the title is The List, and it tells the story of this young American guy, Kirk Johnson, who worked for USAID in both Baghdad and Fallujah. And he was one of, when he went to Iraq, he was one of 7 Americans who spoke Arabic. So, which seemed kind of shocking that there were so few like him. But that allowed him to really become very close with the Iraqis he was working with. And so when he came back to the US, he realized that they were really in danger because of their connection to him, to America, to the military. Anybody who worked with us to help rebuild the country was now, being threatened. And so he started keeping a list of people who were in danger and needed to be saved, and then worked one by one on their cases. And he ended up building, I don't know if it still holds true, but at the time it was the largest pro bono legal effort ever in the United States.
And now there are so many of these people who are coming to the United States, both Iraq and Afghanistan are on the list of at least now twice proposed restrictions. And I know that, bringing people back safely, especially who helped Americans, was a big concern for that film, The List. So what are you watching now, as you're seeing what's going on politically, especially with the relationships with Afghanistan and Iraq? Afghanistan just bombed last week with the
Mother of all bombs,
Moab,
yeah.
the mother of all bombs. So what are you thinking when you're watching this happen?
Well, it's interesting. I think, right now with the mother of all bombs, the Islamic State is very much a focus in Afghanistan, but I think the Taliban is really still the biggest threat there. And it's the most destabilizing force there right now, even more so than the Islamic State. They've just taken much more territory, they control more areas, and it's it's terrifying for the people who are trying to live their lives and trying to send their daughters to school. I think so many of the families, the security question really weighs so heavily on them, and part of it can become an excuse. It's sort of the number one thing that people will say when it's like, no, I'm not letting my daughter go to school because it's too dangerous. But there is truth to that. And so I do worry that, as these threats increase, that, this school and other schools there'll be more threats, more attacks, and it'll be very difficult for the work to get done and for girls to be part of the future of the country.
And there were a couple of people who mentioned when the Americans leave. What do you think is going to happen then, or what is transforming now?
Yeah, we've got about 10,000 troops there now still, and there doesn't seem to be there's no indication that number is going to dwindle. There had been, before Obama left office, there was a plan actually to pull more troops out, but then that changed. And so those troops are there for the foreseeable future, playing, kind of a support role and a training role. And it's hard to imagine that we would leave completely. But it's definitely a very challenging time in the country, and I continue to be so impressed by this village, which is such an interesting place because the hearts and minds really have changed in this very short amount of time. I think sometimes if what happened here, happened in a whole lifetime, we'd think, wow, that was incredible that it changed that much in that amount of time. And here it's been a decade. And, the men in the village who didn't want there to be a girls' school are now not only, supporting the school and really making sure that it stays safe, but also supporting the college, which was, that was the impact campaign for the film. We, as the first graduating class, was, getting ready to graduate. And actually, it was a year earlier than we expected because 7 of the girls in the first class skipped a year.
With that exam?
Because they were very worried, this first class, because the girl that I mentioned that I did the 3-minute piece that tells like her whole story quickly, she was forced to get engaged in 9th grade. And they were really worried that she wouldn't be able to graduate. So she and her friends went to Razia and said, what could we do? Could we speed up the graduation process? And so they did some special tutoring during the winter break, and all of the girls took a test, all 21 girls took a test to try to skip 10th grade, and 7 of the girls passed. And Yalda was one of them, so she did skip the grade. And so they went, so they became the first graduating class. And so we thought, well, what's going to happen now? Are these girls going to be home? Like, what's the future look like for them? Is this it? And so we thought, well, we knew they weren't going to be able to leave the village to go to college. They didn't have the money, they don't have transportation, and just a lot of the families just are not going to let the girls leave. So we talked to the village elders about, well, what if we brought a college here? Would that be okay? And they said yes. And so we made the announcement of this, we called it the Build a School Today campaign, which I announced in Brazil at the Rotary International Convention. And within about 7 weeks, we had $130,000, which is what we needed for the bricks and mortar. And a few weeks after that, Razia and I were back in Afghanistan for the groundbreaking. And it was so interesting. I wasn't there for the first groundbreaking, but I've seen video of it and heard, Razia talking about it. And at that groundbreaking, she was the only woman. It was all the men who didn't want her to be there, didn't want the school, all that. And now here with the college groundbreaking, the girls are there, and they're speaking in Dari and in English and sharing poetry and singing songs. And the men are all sitting where these girls are standing. And several of them said this is the first time that they've ever spoken publicly in front of men. Yeah. And once you have an experience like that, you just, it's like you internalize that. It's like becomes part of who you are, and now you're the person who has spoken in front of men, and what else can you do? What's the next hurdle that you can, jump? And so it was really, really exciting. And the men, too, once they were given an opportunity to speak, because Razia was like, no, you're going to sit there, and you're not going to say a word until the girls are done. When they had an opportunity to speak, it was really cool. They had started to dig the foundation already, and there were all these they had these stones that they had wrapped in this really beautiful paper. So it was like this like kind of foil paper. So it was like bright, bright pink and orange and green with these beautiful bows on top. And so the men, like one by one, where the village elders were picking up these stones and then hopping down into the foundation hole, and then they would speak, and then they'd lay the stone down. And so, these guys who, again, they didn't want them to go to kindergarten, were now saying things like, I hope doctors and ministers come out of this college.
Amazing. I want to make sure that people get a chance to answer questions. I think we have some mics in the audience, yeah? Or ask questions, rather, of Beth. There are a couple of things that made me think, first of all, it was really interesting to be in an audience of so many and hear them gasp at the same points where I gasped when I was watching it by myself. But you mentioned the elders in the village, and some of them were more convincing than others, I felt like, in this film, like, Raila's father, the Malik.
Yep.
And I wondered about that for you as a filmmaker. There was nothing judgmental,
Right.
I think, in the way that you shot it, but I'm wondering about that for you as you were watching.
He's an interesting guy because, he's definitely kind of a jerk. But he's also a product of, the environment, and it's a very involved story. His mother was actually quite involved in forcing him to have the second marriage, and then she died, and he was kind of stuck with it, I would say. But, he also didn't try to get out of it, and he still did it, and they lied to the 16-year-old, and so she thought he had 3 young children and that his wife was dying, when in fact he has 7 children, one of whom is older than she is, and the wife is not sick at all. So, this was really, really terrible. Even her own parents had lied to her. They knew what was going on, but they wanted the dowry money. And, it's hard to, it's very sad, but the story is, so her parents knew the truth, both her mother and her father. And I don't want to say the mother has more culpability here, but she did go, she was going along with it because she wanted the money. But what happened in the end is that they got the money, and then her husband used it for himself to get a younger bride. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. And Khalida,
I just want to say one more thing about the
yes,
Malik, which is he is so supportive of the school. He has 4 daughters there, and it was very hard for the school to fight to bring Rahela back because they were really treading that fine line of, not wanting to push too much and upset him because then they would lose all the girls, and not only lose his daughters, but lose his more general support, which could influence other families to pull their daughters. And when, I've been there many times when something's happening, there's something going on in the village, or there's a little problem at the school, and when they call him, he's there in 10 minutes, and he's finding solutions.
Well, it is very interesting to see the sort of custom, like the way that
Yeah.
people deal with each other. Like Nazima, she goes in with the shame angle, well, if she doesn't show up, they're going to think there's something wrong with the family. And Razia, the same kind of way. And so that must have been fascinating to sort of work around. Did you ever find yourself in the crosshairs of that kind of thing?
Yeah, Razia does some really, really innovative, fun things. One of her most recent things she's done is for the midwife school. In order for the girls to apply or to get in, to be considered, they had to get approval from their fathers that they would be able to, if someone's having a baby, you don't know, this could be 1 o'clock in the morning, they might have to stay at a house. So to know that they had the approval from the family that should something like that be happening, they were okay that the girls could stay. And all the girls who applied got the approval, but for one. And she was so upset. And so, Razia talked to her and got her father's name, and I forget what his name is, but I don't know. Let's say it's Ahmad. And so she calls the father, and she's like, oh, hi. She's like, yeah, I was just talking with your daughter, and she told me, your name, and my favorite uncle, that's his name. And I couldn't believe it. I just had to call you and tell you this. And, she doesn't even have an uncle, and certainly nobody named that name. And she just so she's, buttering him up. And then she's like, oh, and by the way, why the hell aren't you letting your daughter, He's like, no, I should totally, she can stay. So.
That's great. Any questions out here from the audience? We've got one back here. Did I see another one? Oh, right there, sorry. Is the microphone has to be turned on is the only thing.
Thank you for your film, Beth. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Building on your anecdote of the groundbreaking of the college and Razia Jan's orchestration of Who Speaks When, in the beginning of the film, there was a voiceover when she was meeting with the elders that said that she would not be able to hold their attention and they wouldn't look at her. And that seemed to be the case. But as the film went on, she got increasingly more powerful and commanding of their attention. Did that happen organically? Did she make a cultural change in the village? Was it the power of personality? All of those things?
I do think it's a combination. I think they don't really know what to make of her. She was born and raised in Afghanistan. She grew up in Kandahar, actually, and is very distantly related to President Karzai. And she was given, all the opportunity to go to school. She was treated the same as her brothers were treated, and had, freedoms as a child that give her the sense of, that I would like that, and she would like to see that again today for these girls. So she, when she came into, and then she spent almost 38 years in the United States. She came here to go to college. Her brother was studying at MIT, and she came to go to Harvard. And she did start there. She did not graduate, but she got married and had a son, and opened a business and ran a business for many, many years in Duxbury, Massachusetts, a tailoring business, and worked very, very hard. And so, the villagers know that, she has this. They know her. They know that story, but were she a younger woman, this would not be possible. It's her age definitely gives her more kind of command and control in the area, and there's a respect that she has because of that. That alone, her age alone wouldn't do it. So, but she's been able to build this relationship now for many, many years, and so now they actually refer to her as the mother of day subs.
There's a question here in the back.
Hi, so full disclosure, I'm a newspaper reporter, but I wanted to ask about, I saw one of the producers of the film was Ground Truth, and I think that's the same organization that is sort of supporting international reporting and, providing trading and sort of thing. I wanted to kind of ask, with your experience as a print journalist and also now as a filmmaker, what you see as the challenges right now reporting in conflict zones, and with newspaper budgets decreasing and insurance, the ability to pay for insurance for reporters going down, what you see as the future and whether it's sustainable.
Sure. So the Ground Truth Project is an international media organization where I am director of films. And we do a lot of, a big part of our mission is to both mentor, train, and also support both emerging foreign correspondents and now filmmakers with the film division. And so we bring on reporting fellows for so much of our work, and also now offer film fellowships. And I have a different series, there are new films that I'm working on where there are film fellows working with me on those films. I think that what I love about the model that we have at the Ground Truth Project is that it's a distributive model, and so you can find all of our work on our website, but we partner with so many different media outlets, and just really try to meet audiences where they are with short form work, long form work, written pieces, photojournalism, podcasts, feature-length films, hour-long broadcast films, short films for social media, Snapchat stories, Instagram stories. So, I think you name it, we kind of have our hand in it. It still is a challenge. Distribution, is definitely still a challenge. But I think that this this model of really working with different partners is definitely the way to go.
How about reporting in conflict zones? However, this is something that, a newspaper is not going to accept the liability in many cases. And last year on this stage, we saw the film about Jim Foley, who went out there as a stringer and was killed. can newspapers still do that kind of work? And let me know if I'm not rephrasing your question properly.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get to that. So, yeah, I mean, Jim's death was a real turning point, and he was a colleague. I also had done work
Charlie
with the Global
Sennett
Post.
works at Ground Truth, doesn't he, as well?
Exactly. Yep, he's the founder of the Ground Truth Project.
Former Boston Globe reporter? I'm trying to
Exactly,
remember.
yep, foreign Boston Globe, foreign correspondent, and really, I mean, I would say a huge part of his life mission at this point is focused on security for journalists, and to really, especially with emerging journalists and filmmakers, to really focus on not being on the front lines, that there are so many stories that can be told and need to be told that aren't on the front lines. And I think that it really has become more dangerous for freelancers. I mean, so many news outlets now are relying on freelancers to do the work, and that support just hasn't been there. And so I'd say over the past several years, there has been so much work done on this where, I mean, media organizations, it's almost like you name the big media organization, they're involved in this and have committed to, a plan to make sure that journalists can stay as safe as possible in the field, and making sure that no one goes out without the support. That said, you mentioned specifically insurance. I'm actually amazed at how cheap insurance is. It's kind of shocking how I get it when I go, and it's actually fairly inexpensive.
I want to see
like
if
a few
there are any other
$100s.
questions, but I really
Yeah.
want to follow up on that with the idea that if you were a journalist, you could not do an impact campaign. That college would not have been built. And so, and I think for some papers, for some news organizations, you would have to have done the other side of this argument, which I think you did show on some level.
I think the line is I do consider myself a journalist and a filmmaker, and always have, and the impact campaign aspect of it doesn't really change that for me. I think about I don't know, the Romeo and Juliet story from Afghanistan that was very prominent in the New York Times, and the reporter who, Rod Nordquist, who followed that story, and he wrote a book about it. And what he never told his editors at the New York Times was, there were times when he was helping the couple to escape. I mean, had he not helped them in those moments, they would have been killed. And that all became apparent to everybody when he wrote the book, and it all kind of, came out. And so I interviewed him the day after the book was published, and he was kind of waiting for the fallout. He's like, I don't really know why I haven't been fired yet, but he, he got a little slap on the wrist, and the New York Times, the book review wasn't probably the best book review. It wasn't terrible, but maybe that was his payback. But he's still on staff there, and I think that there's this unrealistic kind of expectation of journalists that you're not also a human being, and you don't get caught up and have these emotions, and also that in a situation where you can act and should, that somehow you shouldn't. And so I think, I very much think that, especially with filmmaking, I'm very happy we're able to do both. It would be hard not to, try to take that next step with the work.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, we have a couple. Sorry, how about this one here before we get to that one again? No, it's okay. That one, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, how many other girls' schools are you aware of, and were they inspired and influenced by the one that you told in your story?
This school is very unique because it is private and free. So it's the only free and private school in the country. The other private schools are quite expensive for families, and so only the wealthier families are able to send their children there. And the other girls' schools and boys' schools that exist in the country, the public schools, the quality of the education is very poor right now. It's very hard to get teachers. It's also, here we're used to, you show up at a public school and you're handed your books and sometimes supplies, and there it's such a poor country, and yet they have to buy all of their books, they have to buy everything. And because there's so much need and not enough space, when you're there, you'll see kids. It doesn't matter if it's 8 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You just see kind of mobs of kids all the time in their school uniforms with their backpacks, walking on the streets, and like, how can this be? And it's because they go in shifts. So many of the public schools will have like these 2-hour blocks where the kids go and then they go home and the next group comes for 2 hours. And so that has been, it's very, very difficult for kids to be getting, the best education in that environment.
I think we have time for maybe one more.
Listen, I want to say congratulations on a really incredible film. It's been a journey for you, eight years. How has it changed you, and how do you look at the world a little bit differently now?
I think I had a lot of assumptions about things. It was very easy to think, oh, this is just, crazy. How could you marry off your teenage daughter? And that's just, so backward and wrong. And I don't think today that it's right, but I have a much better appreciation for why it happens. And often there are really serious economic reasons that drive that decision for families. I mean, these families are so poor, they're living on, the average in this village is about $7 a week on average. And so it's a very, very poor community. And now there's been a drought for 2 years, which is causing even more economic hardship. And for these families who have girls, that's kind of sometimes their answer for sustaining the family for the foreseeable future until maybe the next daughter can, get engaged and married. And so I think what's really important and interesting about education and what the families are learning right now is that if there is that economic driver to this decision, really, you can very strongly, I think, now make the argument that if the girls are educated and able to earn an income, it'll be a much better financial situation for the family and for the community. And there's so many studies that have been done about girls' education that show, how when a girl is educated, it does make it better for the family and the community. Now, I mean, I'm of the mindset that it shouldn't matter really what just as long as the girl benefits, that should be enough for everybody. But it is interesting to see that this is kind of scientifically backed up, that there is this bettering for the community and that families thrive more. And I think that that's really playing out right now in a pretty major way in the community because, for example, when I was there in December, I was there for Rahela's graduation, but I also started filming a new documentary there. And the focus of that documentary is really to connect the dots between girls' education and climate change. And I spent a lot of time with farmers in their fields and just, understanding what was happening with the area is pretty famous for their grape harvest and the raisins that they make, which are really plump and delicious if you have a chance to get some. And, this one farmer, he said to me, he has gone from making about $4,000 US in a year to about 600. So that's a pretty drastic change. And, with this now 85% drop in his income, what's happening? Well, his 2 daughters went to school, graduated, and now they are both teaching at the Zabuli Education Center. And he said, I can't even imagine if my daughters didn't work. Like, they are helping our family survive. And so the more things like that happen, the more families will continue to want to educate their daughters, which I think is really exciting. And so that to me was a big, big shift in my kind of, mindset about, what's happening on the ground there and why decisions are being made and just to know that this kind of, change is possible, to really think, the title of the film, What Tomorrow Brings, is, I always had a very negative might be too strong, but it was negative. It was that sort of scary sense of like, oh my God, like what is tomorrow going to bring? It's going to bring more hardship and devastation, and it's going to be awful, and this sense of impending doom with the title. And now after these years and this journey with Razia and the girls, my relationship with the title is really, really positive. It's like, wow, so what does tomorrow bring? What tomorrow brings is, graduation. It brings, more education. And now many of the girls are going to the college that's next door, but now there are families who have agreed to let their daughters leave the village. And several of them are now studying at American University, Kabul, which is something that you could not have anticipated 10 years ago. So that's been very exciting to really just have it reinforced to me that, why hope is such a powerful thing and why it's so reasonable to have it.
I think that is the best possible place to end. Beth Murphy, thank you so much. And please come and join us at the after party. It's over fireworks right across the street. I'm not going to commit Beth to answering more questions there, but you can, have a drink with her anyway. Thank you.